Starmer went in a different direction. He separated military involvement from economic exposure. This is not our war. This becomes the headline, which is brilliant framing because it lets him justify energy subsidies and cost of living support without admitting, that the UK is participating directly militarily. And then in Australia, Albanese just goes straight scarcity management mode, use less fuel, don't hoard, take public transit, take the tram, trust the system to stabilize things because the system is going to come to your aid, hopefully, in a liberal democracy. And then we have very different tones, but the same structure. All three of these, Western leaders translating geopolitical instability into domestic expectations. All three of them are framing economic pain. It's pretty much just unavoidable. All three are positioning the state as the thing standing between the people and chaos. And obviously, this isn't accidental. This coordination is not accidental. It just doesn't come together in some smoky room. It's just structural alignment. These countries share intelligent networks. They depend on the same energy markets. They face identical political pressures when those markets get disrupted. And the parallel messaging happens because underlying conditions are shared, and that's what ultimately is shaping their actions. But for Iran does something genuinely disruptive because hours before Trump's primetime address, the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, releases an open letter to the American people, not to the American government, to the people directly. Pezeshkian asked them to look beyond the machinery of misinformation and consider whether this war actually serves their interests. He asked whether America entered as a proxy for Israel and whether Israel now intends to fight Iran to the last American soldier and the last American taxpayer dollar. And the content of his letter very much matters because it's not just about the timing, right? It's a national address in prime time functions very much as a narrative anchor, and whoever speaks first sets the frame. And this letter from Iran sits right in between introducing doubt before certainty gets its broadcast, and it offers an alternative interpretation before the dominant one gets broadcasted out. And it doesn't need to convince the majority. It just needs to fracture consensus at the exact moment that consensus is being constructed. And that's what's actually being fought over here. Is a shared audience, not diplomats, not generals, regular people trying to why their lives are getting more expensive and whether they should accept it. And the Western framing says it's a necessary crisis. Trump says objectives are nearing completion. Starmer says Britain is well placed to weather the storm. And Albanese admits months of economic shocks, but urges calm. The message is ultimately stability, responsibility, inevitability. And the Iranian framing says it's a constructed conflict. The war isn't inevitable. The threat has been manufactured. The economic pain results from political decisions of Western leaders, not natural forces. And if you're being asked to pay for interests that aren't yours, you should be upset. And that's their message to the American people. And both narratives address the same question. Why is this happening? Who is responsible? What should I accept? Who should I question? And, that competition is very much material. If the Western framing holds, the path forward is controlled de-escalation and managed economic adjustment. If the Iranian framing gains traction, public skepticism rises, political pressure builds, and the legitimacy of continued action erodes. 1 month in, the U.S. political disapproval remains sky high, while Congress has done nothing, which tells you the battle on that information terrain has already been lost. We have new footage coming out where it just gets completely absurd here, where Starmer declares, this is not our war. Well, 23 U.S. long-range bombers are operating out of RAF Fairford, launching bombing missions over Iran from British soil. The gap between the statement and the material reality isn't an accident because it's the operational mechanisms. The state secures domestic consent for conflicts they can't formally acknowledge by simply asserting the opposite of what's happening. And public persuasion isn't supplementary to military capacity anymore. It's constitutive of it. That's why Iran's counter letter isn't just symbolic, it's strategic intervention. The dependency Western governments have on continuous consent, they're exploiting that. And by addressing the American public directly, the Iranian leadership is able to separate public interest from state interest at the exact moment that the state is trying to fuse them together. And the military dimension continues in the Gulf because it's just not as it's visible of a struggle. It's informational. And who defines the war, who assigns responsibility, who determines whether costs are acceptable, those questions are secondary. But they're not secondary to the people who are asking how is this worth? You know what I mean? They're secondary to the people who are doing it. They're secondary to the people who are communicating these things. But they shape what happens next just as much as the strike packages and the sanctions and the assassinations lists, etc. Because narrative dominance is now the prerequisite for this war. 3 aligned governments spoke to stabilize domestic perception. 1 government spoke to destabilize the dominant narrative, and the outcome of that exchange is going to determine how the next phase unfolds. Because in conflicts like this, control over events matters, and control over how those events are understood matters just as much. And this is manufacturing consent when capital supply chains face disruptions that they caused themselves. Not crude propaganda, sophisticated crisis communication that translates distant military action into domestic economic terms, that coordinates messaging across allies without requiring scripts. And it anticipates counter narratives and moves to preempt them. You know, the Strait of Hormuz functions not as geography, but as a narrative device in this instance, the choke point through which imperial intervention becomes comprehensible to the public who's going to pay for it. And when that choke point is threatened, the state doesn't debate. It deploys the infrastructure of perception management to make intervention appear necessary, limited, and ultimately unavoidable. And that is the infrastructure that activated today on April 1st. And it'll activate again many more times because the dependency it serves is structural, not situational. And the war will continue. And so does the war over how you're allowed to understand the terms of it.